Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ahsanul Khaliqin wa Ahsanul Makirin. Alladhi qaddara kulla shay'in. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi. Alladhi wa'addahu lahu bin nasri lahu wa li ummatih. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The alternate history community is no stranger to scenarios of early industrialization, as we have seen in ancient Greece and China. However, one scenario I have found potentially to fail to see is al-Andalus. So, let us ask, what if al-Andalus had industrialized? Why didn't it happen? How could it have happened? How would it have affected? His question is why didn't it happen? The factors of industrialization are the abundance of capital to invest, natural resources such as iron and coal, government support for businesses, abundance of labor willing to work in factories, and an entrepreneurial spirit within society, or at the very least the merchant class. A society which has most of these may have the potential to industrialize, but will not industrialize unless they have the causes or incentives for industrialization, which are as follows. A widespread increase in wages to provide incentive for more efficient means of production with less workers, a competitive international market to spur economic progress, and the rise of a market for consumer goods. Among the missing factors was a government that supported business, largely due to a devastating civil war that broke out in the 11th century AD, which allowed for the Christian kingdoms of the north to initiate a reconquista, and for the Almoravids to re-establish Abbasid dominion over the south of the peninsula in place of a separate Umayyad Caliphate, which allowed influences such as Al-Ghazali and the economy to affect Al-Andalus, and from the missing incentives was a significant widespread increase in wages, as slavery was permitted in Islam, albeit religiously restricted and regulated, and provided an abundance of cheap labor. It is important to note that while early Islam had a flourishing market economy, this declined in the 12th century due to the institution of the centralized feudal economy in Abbasid Persia. Now, how could Al-Andalus have industrialized? Firstly, I will establish the already present factors and causes for industrialization which are already present in Al-Andalus, and there are many of them, which is why I have isolated Al-Andalus as a potential source of industrialization in alternate history. Medieval Islamic market economics was easily comparable to an early form of capitalism based on Islamic law which protects private wealth, as shown by the Quranic verse. لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكونوا تجارة عن تراض منكم. Do not unjustly consume wealth between yourselves, except that is a trade pleases you all. And the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ni'mal mal is salih lil mar is salih, meaning the best of the righteous wealth is for the righteous man. So we could argue this amply provides us with the factors of capital, government support, and entrepreneurial spirit, and a competitive international market. Evidence of advanced metallurgy in Al-Andalus suggests a viable source of iron and steel, complemented by the presence of coal deposits in modern Spain, allows to consider the necessary natural resources. Additionally, Islam encourages work for every man, which gives us the abundance of labor, as the Prophet ﷺ said, ما أكل أحد طعام قط خيرا من أن يأكل من عمل يده وإن نبي داود عليه السلام كان يأكل من عمل يده. There is no better food for one to eat than that from the work of his own hand, and verily the Prophet David عليه السلام used to eat from the work of his own hand. I don't think that it is possible that slavery would somehow have been abolished during this time period by some circumstance. But as the rise of consumer goods necessitates the rise of a middle class, and I guess we could assume that if Al-Andalus prospers well enough, somehow maybe a large middle class develops, and they produce a demand for consumer goods. Now, the final piece in the puzzle is the fitna of Al-Andalus, which was caused when the death of the Umayyad Caliph Al-Hakam II left a 10-year-old Hisham on the throne, who became a puppet of the Hajib Al-Manzur and later Sanchol. Sanchol attempted to seize the caliphate for himself, which is illegal in Islamic law, as only members of the Quraysh tribe, such as the Umayyad clan, may become caliph, and Sanjul was not in any way descended from the Quraysh. This caused the Umayyads to launch a coup, which is what incited the fitna of Al-Andalus. We will simply remove Sanchol from this timeline and assume that Hisham continues to reign as the Umayyad Caliph without any issue, and maybe later on the factors and incentives come together and produce our theoretical industrial revolution. How would this theoretically have affected history? First off, al-Andalus would have gone off an entirely different trajectory. Not only could the Reconquista have failed, if there even would have been a Reconquista, Andalusian Islam would have developed different schools of law, theology, and jurisprudence, as the Caliphate of Cordoba did not, unlike most of the Islamic world, recognize the Abbasid caliphs as their religious leaders, but more rather their own Umayyad caliphs. There's no telling what beliefs and laws they may have developed, but let us assume, for the sake of this scenario, they assume beliefs and laws that encourage scientific research, experimentation, protect private property, and encourage businesses, which is what we'll need for this scenario to progress. Other than that, we have no idea what may have developed. There's no telling how far industrialization would have spread. We may assume that it becomes well established in Morocco due to the presence of coal deposits, and perhaps Syria due to advanced metallurgy, and perhaps Egypt due to the continuation of market economics there. But my only source on that is from Wikipedia, so that's a big maybe. However, closer we get to Baghdad and Persia, I believe the less likely it is for industrialization to have taken place, as the influence of economics and al-Ghazali would have been much stronger there. But do not mistake this for a scenario ends in a renewed Islamic golden age, for we have yet to discuss how it would have affected the West. Beginning in the late 11th century onward, the West would unite in waging a war to wipe Islam from the map in what would be known as the Crusades. There is no doubt that an industrialized army would have defeated an army of armored European knights, but in my opinion, that would only spur the technology transfer that would come soon after. Some scholars have argued that the technology transfer that occurred during the Crusades paved the way for the European Renaissance, and factoring in that Europe at the time was undergoing the medieval war period and the Renaissance of the 12th century, resulting in more agricultural yield, a massive population boom, and the flourishing of the sciences and the arts. And furthermore, as massive deposits of coal in France, England, and Germany, it is not difficult to say that not only would Christian Europe have industrialized soon after, but they would have industrialized faster and eclipsed the Islamic world sooner. Europe had by the time of industrialization in our timeline largely secularized, but in this timeline, the crusading spirit remains. They would have undoubtedly began terrifying, bloody wars of conquest and genocide against the Islamic world. It would have been much worse than our own timeline's age of imperialism. But that is not the worst part of the timeline. The Black Death in our timeline had killed between 20% and 80% of populations across the medieval world in the 14th century, and many areas took 80 to 150 years to recover. In this timeline, industrialization would have caused a massive population boom and forwarded the establishment of a global trade network right before the outbreak of the Black Death. With a much higher population density and institutions of global trade, the Black Death spread would have been drastically more dramatic and much more devastating. It may have been the end of civilization as we knew it. How might we reflect on this terrifying scenario? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the most holy Quran, Wallahu khayrul makirin, and Allah is the best of planners. And from this, we see how well He had planned that we would not have industrialized that early. For certainly, those who seek to destroy Islam would have easily caught up without having been tempered by secularism, and they would continue to pursue their mission of destroying Islam. And furthermore, the Black Death could have destroyed civilization as a whole. Even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala denies us what we seem to be good at first, it will eventually become evident somewhere along the line that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends the very best for the Ummah, as He has said in the most noble Quran, Inna lanassiru rusuluna walladhina amanu. Verily, we shall make victorious our messengers and those who believe. By averting the fitna of al-Andalus, we have allowed al-Andalus and some of the Islamic world to industrialize, but inadvertently allowed the Crusaders to industrialize as well, and for the Black Death to have a more devastating impact. That answers the question, what if al-Andalus had industrialized? And why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow it to industrialize? Verily, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله ولكم وشكرا وجزاكم الله خيرا باستماعكم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.